everyone, and welcome to our next month of subscription boxes. This one is for the basket. We are doing a Christmas one. Some supplies you're going to need are all of your pieces that came in your kit, a pair of scissors if you're working with the sponges, some of the paints that came with your kit, brushes, a paint palette or a paper plate if you have it. I prefer to use the Gorilla Glue Super Glue, and then the colors we're using are Palmetto, Evergreen, Barn Red, and Cotton. You're also going to want a cup of water for any brushes that you're using, and a paint pen at the end if you're doing any accent marks. I like to use a painter's tape. I'm going to rip off a length of it, roll the ends so that it can stick to my surface and be sticky side up. Sticky side up is going to hold down all of my little pieces that I might have. That way I'm not chasing them around on the table. First thing you're going to do is you're going to separate all of your pieces by color. So we're going to start with all of the white pieces, and then we're going to sort out the red pieces, all of your outside candy cane, so I'm still in Halloween mode, candy cane pieces, and then that there is going to be a red piece, except for the little piece of candy on top. So all of these candy cane pieces are going to be white. The solid candy cane piece is going to be red, except for the white candy piece that's above. That is going to be painted white as well. Going to use a little bit of white from your paint pots that you have. Dab my sponge into it. I'm just going to sponge very lightly on top of the candy pieces. You don't want to fill in those black lines that are going to give the texture to your candy pieces. So you're just going to go very, very lightly. Make sure you're dabbing off any excess paint off of your sponge. Less is more. You'd rather do 2 coats than to do 1 coat and have everything get filled in that you don't want filled in. When you're working with this little piece of candy, you just want to make sure you're not going into the red section of the candy canes. If you do a little bit, that's okay. You can cover it up with the red as you go back through. It's just easier to try not to get any white into the candy canes. And now that we're done with the white, we're going to move on to the green. This is a Palmetto. It's a dark green. Your paint should be dry from your white. It dries very quickly. So the Palmetto is going to be used for the pieces of holly and the pine pieces. So we're going to go ahead and take all of the white pieces and put them off to the side, off of our tape, and we're going to attach the green pieces onto our tape so we can go to the next section. As you can tell, these pieces are very delicate, so be very, very careful when handling them to make sure you don't break any of your pieces. If you do end up breaking your pieces, a little bit of super glue or even a little bit of wood glue will be enough to just glue them back together. When it comes to doing these pine pieces, it doesn't really necessarily matter which way is front and back. They're just accent pieces that are going to go in the back of your piece, so it doesn't really matter if you end up accidentally painting the back side or the front side of them. So we're going to get ready and move on to our next pieces. I didn't bother cutting the end off of my sponge from the white. That's going to be a personal preference. I wanted to tone down my green just a little bit from the dark green. So I am using my sponge with white that is still on it. If you want your pine pieces to be darker, then you're going to want to cut your sponge to get the white off of it so it doesn't dilute the paint. I did include a little bit of the lighter evergreen in your kit in case you wanted to do any sort of accent colors with it to lighten it up. Another option could always be to use the white and the palmetto and make a lighter green that way. So I'm using my sponge here with half of it is palmetto and half of it is evergreen. And I'm just going to add some evergreen to my pieces just to give them a little bit more dimension to them. I'm going to just make sure my palmetto is facing the inside and I'm putting the evergreen on the outside edges of my pieces. You can always do it opposite. You can do the evergreen in the center and the palmetto on the outside, whichever look you like best. If you want to give a little bit more drama to it, you can add some white. So I have part of my sponge has a little bit of white on it, and I'm just going to go around the edges with the white just to give it a little bit more drama, a little bit more difference in the tips of some of my pieces. I didn't go overboard with it. I kind of want to keep this as a darker piece with darker color schemes. So I'm just adding just a touch bit of white to the edges. Now that I've finished with my green, I'm going to go ahead and cut the end off of my sponge. I'm going to move on to the next color. Peel all of your pieces off. Again, that should be dry by now, but be very, very careful peeling them off. You don't want to break any of them. If you do break them, we can always glue them back together. Now that I have all of my red pieces back on my tape, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of the barn red, just dabbing my sponge into it a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and paint all of the candy cane pieces, and then I'm going to paint the pieces that are stuck to my tape right now that don't have paint on them yet. Those are my next pieces. With this, you're just going to want to cover all of your candy cane pieces, and just be careful when you get close to the white of the candy piece that's attached to the back. You just want to make sure you don't get red on that. So you can even take a small brush and use a small brush to get around the edges of that candy piece if you don't trust yourself with the sponge. Now that I have all of my pieces painted, I'm just moving the white pieces out of the way, although it really isn't going to matter for this part of the project. I'm getting a slightly damp brush. I'm dipping it into a little bit of white paint, swirling around so I get a nice coverage on my brush. And I'm going to start flicking the paint onto my piece just to give it some speckling, just to kind of break up the solid colors a little bit. Again, because it's white, it doesn't really matter if you get it onto your white candy piece, it's going to blend in. So I just decided to do it on all of my red and green pieces. You can do it on, just the red pieces or just the green pieces if you want to get the look of snow on your pine pieces. And I'm just going to keep applying just a tiny bit of paint to my brush, and using my finger just to flick a little bit of paint onto my pieces. Once your red paint and your white splotches are dry, if you have a extra fine white paint pen, we're going to go ahead and add some accent lines before we start assembling everything. So I'm just adding a little bit of highlighting to some of my pieces. This is purely personal preference on where you want to put them and how many you want to do. When it comes to doing the accent lines on my candy canes, you're going to want to be able to see them through the white frames that are going to get placed on top. So I'm just kind of placing mine here so I can get an idea about how far in on the candy canes I need to put my accent lines so that they can still be seen. Then for doing the accent lines on my pine, I kept it super simple, and I just did a straight line right down the center of the pieces of them, and just kept it super simple on those. Now it's time to glue. Again, I like to use the Gorilla Super Glue. That's my personal preference. It sets very quickly. However, you just have to remember that it sets quickly so you don't have a whole lot of play time with the pieces once you put them on, once you attach them to each other. So I'm just going to add just super tiny drops. If you have wood glue, that's perfectly fine too. I find it's easier to apply it with the paintbrush. Most wood glues are a water-soluble glue, so that makes it easy for cleanup too, so that can be an option as well. When it comes to gluing the candy pieces and the holly pieces, just be aware that they do overlap the front of your basket, so you're going to want to make sure that your clearance is enough. Right here where I am placing this last piece of candy is not a good spot, and I repeat, it is not a good spot. It ends up hitting the handles on my basket, so off screen after this video is finished, I had to pop it off and re-glue it back on. So I glued it up higher onto the candy canes themselves, kind of about halfway up. The picture that comes with your kits will have its correct placement. I took that picture after I fixed it. So if you need help visualizing how far up it needs to go, you can take a look at the picture that's included with your kit, and that'll give you an idea on how far up it needs to go in order to fit. The next pieces we're going to do are your pine pieces. These are going to be completely up to you where you want to put them. I did a little bit of rearranging without any glue just to see how it looks, to see how I wanted to do them, which pieces I wanted to put where. So it took a little bit of fiddling with it, and then when I was finally set with how I wanted them to look, I added a tiny bit of glue to the fronts of the pine pieces, and then I used that to attach them to the back of my candy canes. With my super glue, I had to hold it a little bit longer than I was expecting to, so in the video you see some of them will fall off, and then I just have to glue them back on. If you're using wood glue, you might want to just kind of place your candy cane piece on top of your pine pieces and just let it sit for a little bit, so while that glue can harden up and everything can get really good and attached. And because I have super glue and not wood glue, my stuff is kind of attached. I mean, I'm not going to really play with it too much, let it harden up for a little bit longer, but I am all set, so that's what the back of it will look like. So the next step is going to be to take your back tab piece that you have, and there are two spots where you could kind of put it. I would just attach it to the bigger section. It's not really going to matter that that other one doesn't technically have a back tab. So just attach it there, and then you'll be all set to put it into your basket. Thanks for joining me for another month of painting our basket inserts, and I can't wait to see you next month. Be sure to follow us online. We have our Facebook and our Instagram and our YouTube channel. Thanks. Bye.